But let me ask you first to react to the president saying that he wants to reopen the economy. You heard him say with a big bang, hopefully soon. May 1st is their target. You heard what Fauci said and Krugman said. What do you think about a May 1st target?
Christiane, first of all, thanks for having me. Look, I don't think there's a big bang here. I think we have to approach this as a very incremental approach. First of all, we've got to make sure we can test, and I think testing is the key. Once we start reopening the economy, we're going to have to make sure that we can test people and test people quite aggressively. Because the minute we start seeing early signs of infection, we're going to want to make sure we can capture that and capture that early so we don't get a respread or a reinfection of the whole economy and have to shut it down again. I think that's imperative. Next, we're going to have to be very incremental about the way we reopen the economy. A small store in a neighborhood with 1 or 2 employees that has 1 or 2 customers in the shop at a time, they're going to take one approach. A large company that has 20,000 people coming in its building, riding elevators up and down, they're going to have to take a completely different approach. They're going to have to segment their workforces where certain people come in on a Monday in the morning, certain people come in Monday in the afternoon, and a different crew comes in Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon, and then the Monday crowd repeats on Wednesday. So they make sure that their workforce is safe, and if some of their workforce gets sick, they're not cross-contaminating the rest of their workforce. I think this is going to be very incremental the way we open up our economy.
But that's a pretty, important prescription. I mean, you've obviously thought about this, and I mean, the idea of relay races, so to speak, as you've laid out. First of all, that's a lot of workforce, right? Or what? Or they're going to, companies are going to have to make all sorts of decisions about people. What do you think is going to happen to the nearly 17 million who've signed up for unemployment in the last 3 weeks alone?
So look, people have signed up for unemployment because they need basic wages and basic income replacement. The CARES Act, which remember was introduced on March 22nd, and only about half the money to small businesses is out today. If we get the CARES Act money out into the economy, we're going to take people back off unemployment, and they're going to rejoin the company that they were working for, which is really important. We need that attachment back to the companies they were working for, so people will know they're attached to their companies. They will know where they're going back to work. That is really important, that we get people back attached to their companies. We get their wages replaced. We get their health care replaced so they can buy food, they can buy their necessities, they can pay their rent, they can pay their utilities. That's the first thing that has to happen. Number 2, we get testing in place, which has to happen. And we've got a big backlog worldwide that we have to catch up. We have to catch up that backlog, and we have to get front leaning on testing. Number 3, we can then start working on getting people back into the workforce. But it's not that hard. A company can stagger their workforce so people come in on staggered shifts. So if they're riding public transportation, we're not forcing a lot of people into public transportation all at once. So people coming at 6, people coming at 7, people coming at 8, people coming at 9, people coming at 10, people coming at 11, and then people start leaving by 2 or 3, and you stagger the workforce like that. This is not that hard to do. And by the way, it's much better to have people coming in, even on staggered shifts, and even working 4 days a week or 3 days a week than not working at all. That's how we're going to have to get the economy back. We're not going to get everyone coming in at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning on the first day and all piling into buses and piling into subways and going into taxis. It's not practical. It just won't work. We will probably reinfect so many people that will have to go shut down the economy again. And that, to me, is the worst case outcome.
Right. I mean, that could cause an even worse economic crisis than the one that's facing right now. But I want to pick you up and ask you about one of the things you said just now. This money that's meant to help people, small businesses, etc. It's apparently being very slow to reach the people who need it. And the sort of mechanics of trying to get it, trying to apply for it is very, very slow. And people are running out of money now, and small businesses are running out of money now. What would you say and advise the White House, the government, to speed this up, since, as you put it, very high up on your list of what has to happen now?
Look, the government has to figure out how to get this money out and get it out as quick as possible. I've been saying this for the better part of a month. Just because we pass legislation doesn't fix the problem. This is an execution problem. It's not a legislation problem anymore. We've legislated the money. We've appropriated the money. The money is there. Now we have to get the money into the hands of hardworking Americans so they can live their life, they can buy their groceries, they can buy their essentials. There are easier ways to do this. We have made this more difficult than it needs to be. We are forcing banks into very uncomfortable situations by forcing them into the small business loan mechanism. Many large banks have never been part of the small business loan mechanism. Remember, the Small Business Loan Organization in the United States historically has given out about $30 billion of loans a year, and it's a 6 to 8 week process. We're now having them give out $350 billion of loans, and we want them to do it in an instantaneous process. On top of that, the large banks have substantial rules and regulations that they're having to abide by while they're trying to implement these practices. The Federal Reserve and all of the other regulators in the United States, although they've done a spectacular job on providing liquidity for the system, they haven't relinquished all of the regulations that stand in the way of banks acting quickly.
Right.
Banks are not meant to act quickly. Banks are meant to be very decisive and very deliberate in the way they act. And we've put banks in a position where they're supposed to act quickly. That's not how banks are designed in this day and age.
Right. In the meantime, though, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, as you well know, this organization found that at least 70% of the small businesses who need it, who've tried to apply for these federal loans, are failing. Thousands and thousands are failing due to technical glitches and the like. So if you were still... let's first just address the elephant in the room. I know you're not getting engaged in politics, but there's been a huge amount of, gee whiz criticism about the way these briefings that the president is holding every night are unfolding. At first, they were considered very good and very useful. But now even the Wall Street Journal has got into the issue here, basically saying the briefings began as a good idea to educate the public about the dangers of the virus, but sometime in the last 3 weeks, Mr. Trump seems to have concluded that the briefings should be a showcase for him. The president's outbursts against his political critics are notably off-key at this moment. This isn't impeachment, and COVID-19 isn't shifty shift. It's a once-in-a-century threat to American life and livelihood. So, what's your response to that? But more to the point, given your economic advice, what would you advise that briefing to be used for at a time like this?
Look, I think the president does need to talk about how we're going to reopen the economy. And this idea of a date certain, and this idea that we're going to have a big bang, I don't think that's prudent. I think the president needs to talk about how we're going to open the economy and how we're going to do it methodically, and how every citizen is going to have a role to play, and how we're all going to have to be a little bit patient. But if the more patient we have and the more methodical we are in doing this, the better it's going to be for all of us. Look, we're going to get certain stores open, but we're only going to allow a certain amount of people in. So yes, you're going to have to wait outside. We're going to open restaurants, but we're going to ask restaurants to run at, 50% of capacity. So take half the tables out. Maybe take 2/3 of the tables out and have 1/3 of the tables in, so people are spaced in the restaurant and there's lots of space. So you won't be able to get a table when you want, but at least the restaurant will be open and operating. The president should be talking about those things and saying, look, we'll run the restaurants at 1/3 of capacity for a month. And after a month, we'll go to 50% of capacity. And after a month, we'll go to in the third month, we'll go to 80% of capacity. In month 4, we'll be back at 100% of capacity. And those are what the president should be talking about when he gets on his evening speech, when he talks about the economy. Look, I think the president has done a very good job working with Congress and getting appropriations done and getting money appropriated for U.S. citizens. And so I do give them very good marks on what they've done to stimulate the spending ability of people to stay home. Remember, we've asked 97% of our population in the United States to stay at home and take themselves out of the United States economy. We are also going to ask them to re-enter the economy at some point, but we're going to ask them to re-enter the economy on a slow and methodical basis. And that's what the president should talk about.
Well, so to my point, I'm still trying to understand how you analyze the performance up there, because part of this is also, from all the figures we're seeing, is to encourage confidence in people who've been under lockdown. Yes, they're worried about their own finances and the general economy, but they're also going to be quite scared about the idea of getting back into the workforce. I know you've talked about it and other business leaders have. So when the president uses, like he did on Monday night, the White House podium as a political rally and ran a video that, I mean, people are comparing to, North Korea in their extreme commentary on it as a propaganda device. Is that what is appropriate? Is it seemly? And is it going to help the people who need the most reassurance from the White House podium?
Because I think we're at the point now where the vast majority of Americans understand the COVID virus, the pandemic that we're living in. And I think they understand their role. I think we understand stay at home. I think we understand social distancing. I think we understand flattening the curve. These are all new words that we none of us had heard of at the beginning of the year, and now we understand them, and we have a vivid understanding of what they are. I think the president now needs to use his time in the White House briefing room to talk about what's ahead of us and where we're going next. And he needs to talk about the slow, methodical reopening of the economy. That, to me, is what the Americans have not heard about. We've not talked about how we're going to methodically open the economy, how we're going to protect people, how we're going to let the baseball season start, but we're going to let the baseball season start with no fans in the stadium, but you're going to have the ability to watch sports again. We might let the National Basketball Association play again. We might let football or soccer games happen again, but you're going to watch them on TV. You're not going to go to the stadium. But a month from now, we may let 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 fans in the stadium. I think his time would be very wisely used to lay out a blueprint, a high-level blueprint on how we're going to achieve that.
So you were his former top economic advisor in the White House. Do you have a phone link to him? Can you tell him this? Do you tell the Secretary of the Treasury or other people in the White House who you may know on this issue? Are you able to advise?
So I have made myself available to anyone in Washington that wants to talk. I have been talking to people in the White House, and I have been delivering my thoughts as openly and candidly, even more candidly to them as I am to you. So my thoughts, these are not secrets, is what I'm telling you. I'm telling them.
All right. Okay, so I want to know what you think of one of the sort of rationalizations or the descriptions that the president has made about opening up and who's in charge. He says the president has total power. He's got himself into a big kerfuffle with governors, and here's the soundbite that's relevant.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total, and that's the way it's got to be.
Total. Your authority is total.
It's total. It's total.
Your
And the governors know that.
So if a
The governors know that. Now you have a couple of bands of excuse me. You have a couple.
Could you rescind that order?
You have a couple of bands of Democrat governors, but they will agree to it. They will agree to it. But the authority of the President of the United States having to do with the subject we're talking about is total.
So Gary Cohn, what is your view on that? I mean, if the president is going to get himself into a big fight with the governors, despite the Constitution, how does that help, not confuse people about which way is up for reopening the economy?
So, Christiane, I want to remind people how we got into this economic, basically slowdown or economic withdrawal. The first people to react were actually some of the biggest businesses in this country. Some of the biggest businesses in the country said, hey, my people or my clients are getting sick, and therefore I'm going to shut my business down. And I'll take some very vivid examples, whether it was the National Basketball Association or the NCAA. They started canceling their games and canceling their basketball tournaments long before the White House or the governors or the mayors decided to shut down the economy. So the first responders to what was actually going on were some of the businesses in this country. Some of the stores shut down. Some of the other businesses really shut down. And then you saw the public response sort of follow after what happened in the private world. Right now, we're in a position where the White House has their position, but the mayors and the governors are clearly making the decisions in their cities and states. But ultimately, even if the mayors and governors make decisions, it's ultimately up to the individual employers and the individual businesses what they think is in the best interest of their people and their clients to ultimately make a decision about what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, that's the answer. Let me just ask you, I mean, hindsight is 2020, obviously. I mean, one of the great achievements of the Trump presidency, as far as they're concerned, is something that you helped shepherd through, which is the 2017 tax cuts. But many are saying, I mean, you thought that, you know, growth would pay for the for all of that, but in fact, it's led to big debt and deficits. And I wonder whether you think that, in retrospect, given the big hole the U.S. is going to be in after this $2 trillion plus and maybe even more, whether you call it stimulus or disaster relief, whether that might not have been so painful had there not been these tax cuts, which also left such a huge hole in the economy.
So I almost look at it the other way. You know, remember how good the economy was. Go back to the middle of February, you know, sort of February 19th we had an all-time record high stock market. We had unemployment down at 3.5%. We had wage growth at 3%. We had everything working well and everyone in financially really good shape in the United States. Could you imagine entering a crisis or this healthcare issue with an economy that was not in good shape and putting this on top of that? The fact that we're economically in very sound and very strong position going into this healthcare crisis, I actually think will be very helpful to get us to recover through this. The deficit that was being created prior to this healthcare crisis was not being created by the tax plan. It was being created by the fact that Congress just continues to spend money despite what the revenues were. Revenues under the new tax plan were actually going up year over year. And what I think the most interesting thing that will come out of this big COVID crisis or this healthcare crisis, this pandemic, will be the fact that we now in the United States have to understand that literally on a moment's notice, we may have to spend $2 to $5 trillion to help our fellow citizens through some unforeseen situation in this country. That means that we have to run our finances in this country in a position that we can be in a way that we can be in a position to do that. That means that the next Congress, the Congress that comes in 2021, better sit down and look at our budget and the way we spend money, and they better decide really what's important, and they should stop wasting money. We're also going to have to look at the revenue side of the equation. We're going to have to look at how do we collect revenue, and we're going to have to look at our taxes and who do we tax and who pays taxes, and how do we put ourselves in a position where our budget makes sense and our revenue side of the equation makes sense, knowing that at any given moment, we could be in a position where we have to put $2 to $5 trillion into the economy.
And on that note, I hope I can come back to you and dive down into there, because clearly this is going to be an issue, the math, as one tries to come out of this crisis. So, Gary Cohn, thank you very much indeed for joining us.